Hello students, welcome to Administrative Law Lectures. I am Marjina Sultana, an Assistant Professor from Indraprastha Law College, Greater Noida. This video is in continuation of the previous video on control of delegated legislation, where we have done parliamentary control of delegated legislation. Today, we will be covering executive or procedural control and judicial control of delegated legislation. The next type of control mechanism of administrative rule in India is procedural or executive control. There is no particular procedure for it. There is no particular procedure until the legislature makes it mandatory for the executive to follow certain rules or procedures. And to follow a particular format, it may take a long time, which will definitely defeat the actual objective of the act. Hence, procedural control means that under the parent act, certain guidelines are given which need to be followed, while whether it is mandatory or directory to follow it or not. It includes three components. First is pre-publication and consultation with an expert authority. Citizens have the right to access to law, right to know the law, because this delegated legislation, before it is made, it should be published. There should be pre-published to give an opportunity to know and consultation, to have a consultation. And in the second component is to publish it after it is made. First is pre-publication, and the second is publication of delegated legislation, and the third is laying of rules. This can be either mandatory or directory. In the case of Raza Buland Sugar Company versus Rampur Municipal Council, certain specified parameters were given to know whether it is mandatory or directory. The first parameter is scheme of the act. Second is intention of the legislature. Third is language used for drafting purpose. And the fourth is convenience caused to the public at large. These three parameters, from these parameters, it will be known whether it is mandatory or directory to publish or to lay the rules of the delegated legislation. The third control mechanism is the judicial control. There are also ways that the courts can control delegated legislation. Delegated legislation can be declared ultra vires, which is a Latin word for beyond the power or authority or lack of power or jurisdiction. And the effect of this is to make delegated legislation void or not effective. Judicial review upgraded the rule of law. The court has to see that the power delegated is within the ambit of the Constitution as prescribed. Judicial review is more effective because courts do not recommend, but it clearly strikes down the rule which is ultra vires in nature. Under Clause 2 of Article 13, it provides that the state shall not make any law which takes away or abridges the rights conferred by Part 3 of the Constitution, and any law made in contravention of these clause, this clause shall, to the extent of the contravention, be void. And the uh, subclause A, clause 3 of Article 13 clearly defined what is meant by law. So this judicial review of delegated legislation is based on, it depends on two basic grounds. That is, whether this delegated legislation is ultra-vires to the Constitution of India or it ultra-vires the Enabling Act or the Parent Act. One of the grounds based on which it can be declared in judicial review is that it ultra-vires the Constitution of India. And it happens in two situations. The first situation is when the Parent Act itself is ultra-vires the Constitution. And in the second situation, the Parent Act holds good and is within the limits of the Constitution. However, the delegated legislation made under the Parent Act may be ultra-vires the Constitution. So, when the Parent Act violates the provision of the Constitution, the delegation made under such act is also void. And this can be seen in the case of Chintaman Rao versus State of MP. In this case, the district collector under delegated authority passes an order for prohibiting beauty manufacturing, where it was held that the order passed is ultra-vires because it violates the fundamental right guaranteed under Article 19 1G of the Indian Constitution, which talks about freedom of trade and profession, which has been guaranteed to all the citizens of India. So, in certain cases, it can be observed that certain provisions of the Act may be unconstitutional on the ground of being excessively delegated, which does not mean that the whole Act is unconstitutional. The second ground of judicial review of delegated legislation is that it ultra-vires the Parent Act. When the delegated legislation is not authorized by the Enabling Act or where there is an excess of authorities, it invalidates the subordinate legislation. So the validity of delegated legislation can be questioned on the ground that it ultra-vires the Parent Act. It was observed in the case of Ram Prasad versus State of Uttar Pradesh that the Uttar Pradesh Panchayat Raj Rule 87, framed under the Parent Act, was held to be ultra-vires of the Parent Act. In another case of Additional District Magistrate versus Sri Ram, the Supreme Court held that the conferment of rulemaking power by an act does not enable the rulemaking authority to make a rule which travels beyond the scope of Enabling Act. In this case, Delhi Land Revenue Act and Delhi Reforms Act did not empower rulemaking authority to classify land or to exclude any area from preparation of record of right and annual register. The court held that the rules are ultra-vires the Parent or Enabling Act. So the control by Parliament is before it is passed, and the control by court, that is judicial control, is after it is passed. So this was all about control of delegated legislation. Thank you.